Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. I'm very excited today to share with you someone that I've admired and respected and followed for many years now. Dr. Bandy Lee is a forensic psychiatrist. She's a medical doctor. She also has a Master's of Divinity. She's an internationally recognized expert on violence and taught at Yale School of Medicine and Yale Law School for many, many years. Uh, in addition to her authoritative textbook, she's published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and chapters, 17 edited scholarly books and journal special issues, more than 300 op-eds in outlets like The Guardian, New York Times, Boston Globe, The Independent, and Politico. She's assembled fellow professionals for the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. Making history and predicting the events of January 6, 2021 through her profile of a nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, which I have, but I couldn't find Bandy before this, so I can't hold it up, but people will check it out in our blog and online. And you created and are president of the World Mental Health Coalition, which I am a proud member of. And my goodness, so I've met you in person. You've spoken at my forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School. You've just been courageously saying, hey, I'm an expert on dangerousness. This is my profession. We have a duty to warn. And your book was a bestseller. You got a lot of publicity, and then things shut down. And I don't know how many of my listeners have been following you as closely as I continue to, but wow, you called it. I can say I called it too, but from a different angle.
Absolutely.
And
You did.
and here we are. It's 2023, and now recently Georgia just filed RICO conspiracy and racketeering charges. So there's so much to talk about, but I'm going to just introduce, I've introduced you now, and I want you to tell my listeners, as a forensic psychiatrist who knows dangerousness, your reflections. Where are we now, and where have we come, and what do we need to know and do? This is our hour, please.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. Of course, Dr. Hassan, you've been certainly a part of the movement of mental health professionals who have been trying to alert the public and have foretold just about everything that has happened since the election of Donald Trump. And so, yes, it began with his election that, of course, earlier on in the campaign, we
2016 election, right?
That's right. We became concerned. But when he was elected, my friend and old colleague Judith Herman wrote to President Obama at the time that this new president-elect needed a neuropsychiatric evaluation. And after that, we got in touch, and my phone was ringing off the hook the morning after election because people were saying, well, as a violence expert, this was something that we needed to speak about. And I agree. I have no regrets about speaking up. Since early 2017, those of us who were not previously in the public eye or were involved in politics came out believing that we had a professional duty, a duty as citizens to share the knowledge that we had, altogether shared the close to 100 years of scientific research and decades of clinical experience and the knowledge that we had all together, that we had a duty to warn the public and inform it so that it could protect itself. And I believe that it's precisely because our voice was central and most important that it was important for the powers that be to shut us down. And that's what happened. And unfortunately, everything that we feared would happen without any intervention, without proper intervention, has happened and still is ongoing to this day.
Yeah, it's been a living nightmare.
Yes, indeed.
And I'll also add, so Judith Herman is renowned for trauma and recovery psychiatrist. She's somebody in my space. People really admire her. Robert J. Lifton wrote in this book. He's also someone that my listeners are familiar with.
Yes.
He has another book coming out on resiliency of survivors, by the way, soon. Philip Zimbardo, another expert, former president of the American Psychological Association, contributed a so a lot of luminaries have weighed in on this.
Absolutely.
So, so I'm aware that the Big Pharma and American Psychiatric Association were calling on the Goldwater Rule and telling media they can't have you on, but you're not a member of the American Psychiatric Association, and the Goldwater Rule has nothing to do with your duty to warn and my duty to warn as an expert. Warning. So please share with my listeners some of that backstory.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association just came out aggressively beyond anything that we thought it would do. If anything, it should have led the way in terms of our professional obligation to protect society, because its own ethics guidelines say that we have a responsibility to patients as well as society. In the very first couple lines of its preamble, that's what it says. And yet,
Right.
with the Trump era, it changed the Goldwater Rule. That's what people don't recognize as readily, that they not only affirm this rule that actually nobody paid attention to before Donald Trump. It was considered outdated when it went into the books in 1973. Since 1980, we have not been diagnosing by personal interview alone, and have paid much more attention to objective behavior and patterns of behavior over time. So even diagnosis does not depend on a personal exam, but especially what we were speaking about, dangerousness or unfitness. These evaluations are not done, don't rely so much on a personal interview. In fact, for the most dangerous personalities, a personal interview is considered the least informative, and in fact, some take away from the accuracy of the assessment. And that's actually an obligation to society, because whether or
Right.
not an elected official is fit or dangerous is important for the public to know, not for the person
Yep.
you might take in as a patient, who there is no patient in this context.
Right. And there's no psychological evaluation for anyone running for public office. So now we have Congress people and senators with AR-15s on their Christmas card greetings,
Yes.
espousing QAnon and other kinds of nutso psychotic things. In fact, recently I read, you have is it a Substack? Messaging about a mass psychosis is what's occurring, where people are just not even listening to Trump's own people who said the election was fair and square. They're in a psychotic bubble.
Yes.
So talk about that, please.
Well, we've been warning since the very beginning that if Donald Trump were not properly intervened with, his psychological dangers will then translate into social, cultural, geopolitical, and civic dangers. And that's exactly what has happened. I've started to call it the Trump contagion, so that people can recognize what the source of this is and what the solution would be. This is not normal for the culture, certainly. And
right.
Accepting it as normal, framing it as normal, or simply a different political stance or everyday ideological discourse, which is, of course, what the Trump camp wants, but that's not reality. The reality is that there is a distinction between healthy ideology and thoughts that might be espoused because of mental disorder or defect and because of pathology. And those are the kinds that we need to be alert about, because they can quickly bring a society down a death spiral.
And so I've been critical of the media, and you just touched on something that I would like you to expound on, because I have a large followership in the media. Talk to them, like, what's wrong with equivocating what Trump is doing with what Biden is doing, for example?
Well, I have often compared the Trump contagion to like the COVID pandemic. You wouldn't say that a COVID infection is the same as just any other health condition or someone's bodily state. In fact, one becomes very impaired, and because of the infectiousness of it, it becomes very dangerous for the population. And whatever state they're in, it would not be the state they would choose to be in if they had optimal health. And that's what we see also with the mental health pandemic, which is what I've called it. And I've also said that controlling the mental health pandemic is the first step to controlling the viral pandemic. Of course, that didn't happen, and see how the death rate in the United States was the highest and absolute highest in the world in terms of numbers, and the highest in terms of per 100,000 population in the industrialized world, because we did not follow public health measures, which could have even contained it entirely. I would argue.
Yeah, they were saying it was a hoax. They were saying that it's that ivermectin is better than a vaccination, and all kinds of, bizarre, crazy stuff. And RFK is continuing to say crazy, anti-science, anti-medicine.
So very similarly, the Trump contagion itself has to be contained very quickly, or it can spread in almost uncontrollable ways, in ways that we cannot counter by rational discourse or through politics as usual. I warned that the 2020 election alone would not contain Donald Trump, and indeed, his defeat certainly did not contain him.
Right. Yeah, I actually warned at the end of the cult of Trump that if he didn't win, there would be violence. And I cited Jim Jones. Look what happened when Congressman Ryan confronted Jones, and Jones realized he had no future. He took a lot of people down. And that's another topic I wanted to ask you about, because Trump's rhetoric is increasingly revenge and violence. And I know my former cult has an AR-15 gun factory and a cult worshiping AR-15s and 2 training compounds. So I'm really worried that they're going to go out and do violence against perceived enemies. Please, what do you think? And what do we do?
Yes, absolutely.
What can we do?
The longer that we've allowed this to go on without, again, proper mental health intervention, the more dangerous it has gotten. In fact, we have entered the most dangerous period yet, because the delusions, the fixed false beliefs, the paranoia, the vengeance-seeking behavior, and violence proneness, all these aspects have only increased because of Donald Trump's continued exposure to the public, and that has not stopped. That's where mental health expertise would have been enormously helpful, because just about in every other circumstance, courts, prisons, and law enforcement do consult with us on how to handle dangerous individuals, how to contain them, when to release them out into the public. And whereas the legal system is involved with providing just punishment, mental health experts are involved with containing dangerousness and protecting the public. And this has not been done in ways that has developed into a calamity, frankly. And that's why we are at such a peril in terms of our democracy as well as our nation's security and survival.
Right. And as I realized when I was writing and researching the cult of Trump, there are many authoritarian religious cults in the cult of Trump, and people are following their leader, whether it's Scientology, the Moonies, or the New Apostolic Reformation groups, or Opus Dei. And so the religious freedom smoke cloud, makes a hands off. It's people's religious belief that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. And for me and for Christians who know the Bible, they're like, you're misquoting Jesus and the Bible, please. But the IRS decides who's a legitimate religion and who isn't. And it's part of the confusion that creates, I think, that susceptible state where these certainty, narcissists who are so, effective at using words and deflecting and projecting and distorting and pathologically lying.
Well, they're effective at exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of the population. And somehow we have allowed pathology to be used as a political weapon for winning elections and for advancing agendas that would otherwise be unpopular or that the population would recognize as being self-destructive.
Right. So I'm going to ask you, okay, the Biden administration's listening right now. What do they do? What, in your opinion? I have my thoughts about public health, declaring a public health emergency and doing research and inoculation programs, PSAs on mind control and how to discern a legitimate source of information and how to trust science and what the scientific method actually is and how to be a good citizen. And I that's my thoughts, but please share some of your thoughts. The Bidens are listening, fingers crossed. Somebody in their administration's listening.
Well, of course, he could have done a lot when he came into the presidency to recalibrate and bring us back to reasonabness and just norms.
Well, I think he's done a lot.
Yes,
actually,
he has, and in fact, he has done certain things far beyond any presidency. But as far as mental health is concerned, I have to say he has skirted the topic, and he has not brought the kind of attention that the lessons of the Trump presidency should have brought, such as to strengthen the 25th Amendment, for example. When early on, there was a lot of discussion of the 25th Amendment. And in fact, I was invited and my colleagues were invited to speak with more than 50 Congress members who said that if we were able to educate the public on the medical aspects, then they would be able to act politically. And even the drafter of the 25th Amendment himself, John Farrick, said that he meant the amendment to be driven by medical data, not by politics. And
explain to my listeners what it is, because I'm not sure everybody knows what the 25th Amendment says.
Yes, the 25th Amendment was an amendment that was added in the 1960s to clarify succession of presidency. But it has a clause in there that if a president, for whatever reasons, physical or mental, it becomes unable to discharge his duties of office, his or her duties of office, then basically the cabinet and the vice president would step in and and even involuntarily remove him for there to be executive capacity, mental capacity in the executive office. But what is not spoken about is that this should be data-driven and driven by medical data when pertinent and mental health data when pertinent, that it should be based in reality. But instead, it was turned into a purely political exercise that the vice president would drive, whereas in fact, John Feerick clarified in many of his workshops and in the conferences that we spoken together that the vice president was meant to come in last. So in order to improve the viability of the 25th Amendment, Jamie Raskin and other representatives had put in a bill that would kind of build in medical professionals into this body that would decide.
And bipartisan medical professionals, so
Yes.
there's no accusation that there's partisanship, that it's really based on clinical data and specific things.
Yes.
But I guess for me, as the non-politically educated, really, or savvy person, it seems to me if the president picks the cabinet and the vice president, isn't there a conflict of interest? Like, shouldn't there be some mechanism where Congress or Senate should vote and call upon a medical evaluation?
And that is the other body that the bill would have supported. Exactly.
Ah.
So there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. It was a viable avenue and actually a just avenue that was turned inoperable, partly because mental health professionals were silenced. And I and my colleagues have also told the then Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, that she needed to have mental health expertise or even to consult with us in private to be able to be successful in her impeachments. She did not do that. And as a result, both impeachments did not go any further than the House of Representatives and also prosecution. We had advised that that this should be carried out in a way that takes into account mental health aspects, so that Donald Trump cannot turn it into a purely political exercise and make it ineffective. And also the COVID pandemic management. As I said, we had advised that because that presidency was overwhelmingly more of a mental health emergency than anything else, that mental health expertise would be helpful. But of course, it's hard to do when the public is not informed. And there was a time shortly after our book was out, actually, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump was an unprecedented New York Times bestseller of its kind. And thank you. And within 3 months of its publication.
No, it's a great, you did 2 volumes. The first had 27, and then you added 10 more.
That's right.
I even flew to D.C. for the press conference that you were doing for this book at the press club in D.C.
And within 3 months of the book being released, we were the #1 topic of national conversation. And all major news media, cable and network, were inviting me. I was actually impressed at that time that there was no reticence whatsoever of this being about mental health. It was only after the American Psychiatric Association very deliberately and aggressively campaigned against us that suddenly speaking about the mental health aspects of this crisis became taboo, and they framed it as creating a stigma against those with mental illness, whereas in fact all the literature shows that silence promotes stigma, not discussion.
Yeah.
And so here we are, where we're even further backward than we were in 2017 when the book was first released, and mental health experts are entirely blacked out of the major media, and networks and even radio programs are afraid to have any of us on. The New York Times deletes my quotes if I were ever interviewed, whenever I'm interviewed.
Me too, unfortunately.
Most recently, NPR canceled 2 of my shows, both on All Things Considered and another one, Here and Now, that was already recorded and canceled at last minute. And so this is very worrisome, because if we cannot talk about the problem, it doesn't make the problem go away. It makes it fester and actually propagate unchecked. And it does not bode well for the country and the world.
Yeah, so I have a theory, Bandy, at least from my work on cults, that it's actually cult members who've reached very high levels in corporate media that are censoring. And I say this first from firsthand knowledge with the Boston Globe, my hometown paper, which, I've been here since the 70s, and they would quote me every time there was a cult story. And then there was a 10-year period where there was no cult stories. And if there was, it was a sect, SECT. And a friend of mine who was a writer for the Boston Globe said, the editor is Opus Dei. And I'm like, oh, the Catholic group that says the Pope is satanic, and that the extremist Catholic bishops that are trying to split, the followers and move them all to the right wing. Oh, and William Barr was Opus Dei. He was on and when my book came out, the PR person said, if Steve thinks he's going to get in the media calling the Attorney General of the United States a member of a cult, like, forget it.
Yes, and as you know,
and Barr is back in the media. But it's not just Opus Dei. I think the Mormons, there are so many Scientologists have people in it. So the question is about infiltration to co-opt the public knowledge about something that's so obvious to all of us, that this is like propaganda, disinformation, but a very specialized form.
Yes, indeed. And if these dangerous personalities were called out, or if the public were informed about how these personalities operate and how they use psychological means to, in fact, reform their thoughts and control through control of information, then their power positions become endangered. And so, as you know, my background comes from working with violent offenders and street gangs and prisons, the prison population. What has alarmed me over the years, over the last 25 years that I've been in practice, is that the dangerous personalities that used to be confined in jails and prisons are increasingly taking up leadership positions in society. That means that we as a democratic society are not containing them well. And in fact, they are being allowed to take over in ways that would, in fact, diminish and undermine democracy. And that's exactly what is happening. They first started taking over corporate positions. More and more CEOs would have these dangerous personality traits. And now in the judicial and legal system, and now in politics.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the traits. I mean, I reference Fromm's malignant narcissism, which isn't in the DSM, but talk about what you look for as a forensic psychiatrist, these dangerous personality traits.
Yes, of course, malignant narcissism is kind of at the interface between pathological narcissism and sociopathy or psychopathy. And many of the individuals I've dealt with have had these features, pathological narcissism and sociopathy. I've repeatedly said that sociopathy is a societal disorder more than an individual disorder, in that it's vulnerable individuals who manifest this, but
Mm.
societal conditions create them. They are
Mm-hmm.
damaging individuals who violate other people's rights, who have no empathy or compassion for other human beings, and who are driven to harm. And so imagine a society being run by these individuals. Well, we have seen what happens to such societies. It happened with Joseph Stalin, with Adolf Hitler, with Mao
Right.
Zedong. So we know what dangers we are in. But I don't feel that the public truly appreciates, because they have not been exposed to such personalities at wide scale. They do not
Right.
deal with such defects and such levels of malevolence that we do as mental health professionals at times, and
Right.
especially,
Or historians who studied these dictators and criminal
yes,
types, et cetera. I just want to name things like, in addition to lack of empathy, they think they're above the law. So the ends justify the means, and they pathologically lie. And they have sadistic traits and paranoid traits, and they threaten revenge and silencing and inability to trust. So just to flesh out, these are identifiable things by how people talk, and through a history of interactions with people that who say, "Oh yeah, he's totally transactional. It's all about him. He'll lie and say he'll take care of you, and then he won't pay his bills." For decades, but people get tricked because of the charm initially, and they don't do their homework and research that this is a personality disorder,
and oftentimes it's
right?
beyond the ordinary person's imagination that someone could be
Good
so
point.
ill-intentioned and so out to harm and derive pleasure from harming others. That's
Yes.
usually inconceivable to most of us with uh, normal mental makeup.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The average nice person can't imagine what's going on in the mind of one of these people, but we can because we've dealt with them on and on and on. And it becomes, oh, stereotypical, cult leader profile here. The Surgeon General put out a report about young people on the internet with record levels of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, body dysmorphia. And so we're talking about, the president putting more attention to mental health. We have the Surgeon General with this report, but it seems like a very important moment where we should be connecting the dots with online behavior and this radicalization and keeping people in these rabbit holes of authoritarianism. So I don't want to give up on trying to get a public health initiative effort, if anyone from the Biden administration is listening, for some practical steps. And it might involve just getting a meeting of top professionals together, like yourself, with officials in the administration and mapping out, how do we depolarize America? What are the mental health steps we could be taking that's within our power to do, that's actually going to lower the depression, the anxiety, the pills, the alcohol and drug taking behavior, and get people to feel hope again that we can get out of this mess. So I just wanted you to comment and try to, yeah, because I'm sure you're aware of online malevolent practices that are happening to our people.
Yes, certainly. There is a mental health crisis as never before in this country, it seems, in that a large proportion of young people have thought about suicide, have attempted suicide. There's an opioid crisis that is ongoing, and the U.S. is the only country among the industrialized nations that is going down in life expectancy. And that is thought to be because of deaths of despair. and suicides, drug overdoses, and certainly youth suicide is going up dramatically. I agree with you in that there is a large component of the social media addiction, isolation, and lack of meaningful social contact, and of course exacerbated by the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, became a lot worse because of Donald Trump's mismanagement.
Isolated us.
Yes.
Sure.
And so a large contributor to this, I would still go back to the Trump contagion, and our inability to draw us out from this or address it in a just manner. Why aren't mental health professionals being invited to all different news media to speak about the general mental health crisis, if not about Donald Trump? Again, it goes back to the intervention that the American Psychiatric Association made that somehow signaled to all the media that mental health experts are not to be shown in public. And and it is affecting our general mental health and our collective suicidal tendency, I have said, in that we are currently in really a public mental health emergency, and humanity's survival is at stake in terms of what we are willing to accept in terms of nuclear danger. We still do not have a mental fitness test for commanders in chief when all other military officers who deal with nuclear weapons are required to undergo rigorous psychological testing before
great point. Yes. Yearly evaluations if you're going to be on a nuclear sub.
Yes.
And yet the commander-in-chief doesn't need a psych eval?
And even after the Trump presidency, where we had a dangerous personality, and we know for a fact that multiple times he came very close to using nuclear weapons, and General John Kelly, actually, it was reported that he secretly bought our book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, used it as an owner's manual for how to deal with Donald Trump's abnormal psychology and his dangerousness. And that might have prevented a nuclear war against North Korea. And also climate destruction. This year was the hottest on record by multiple orders of magnitude, and yet we are not taking the steps that are necessary for our survival as a species. And this goes far beyond politics. It is a mental health issue, a medical issue, and an urgent issue of our survival.
And that's where your expertise as a medical doctor who's a psychiatrist, who knows the law and knows how to forensically evaluate people's conditions, is, in my mind, critical to bridge things like the Surgeon General saying we know this, that young people are being malevolently affected on the internet, and mental health. I'm just a mental health person. I'm not an MD, but you're you have the creds, and your friends and other people who've written this book. So,
well, you bring valuable knowledge that few of us have in terms of the study
I do
of
my
cults.
best, Bandy.
Yes.
But thank you so much for your support always. So now I want to shift to a different frame about another area of the law that is got a huge need to be reformed. You and I have talked about family law and the family courts, I should say. And you asked me if you could speak about some of the things you've been learning there. So please share.
Yes, thank you for
what
that.
do we need to know? Sure, of course.
I believe it's relevant here because family courts are, to my great astonishment, my 25 years of serving as an expert witness for criminal and civil courts did not prepare me for what I discovered in the family courts. Essentially, family courts are a microcosm of authoritarianism in that they operate in secrecy. We think of family courts as being courts of law, but in fact, they are not. They're the only court not bound by the law because they're given wide discretion, essentially given license to do anything, and it all happens in secrecy. So what is happening in family courts is that violent individuals are allowed full reign, especially when couples are divorcing and families are splitting up. Instead of protecting the families, they are essentially, as we know, domestic violence is very prevalent. And domestic violence often signals and portends more widespread or general violence. And so there's a lot of family violence that goes on, and many of these cases present to family court. What's been happening is that especially children have been transferred to the violent parent, usually, and away from the safe and protective parent, to the point where hundreds of children are dying per year. I've been calling it various things, a hidden genocide, because a certain type of people are being targeted in courts and to their harm and death. And you would think that something of this magnitude would be known throughout society, but it's kept under strict secrecy through gag orders and through such sudden trauma that that those who are engaged in these rulings cannot gather themselves to speak up. Recently, the UN Special Rapporteur gave a report on this crisis. It started in the United States, and family courts are the one unregulated, totally unaccountable court in the United States that has been practicing.
Who knew?
Yes.
I didn't know this. So these are not federal courts or state courts?
They are.
And how do the judges get appointed?
They're usually county courts. Judges can be appointed or elected, but family law is considered kind of the law that people are the last resort of where you wish to go as a judge, and so so the quality of the judges is generally low, but they are also given just complete control. It's their own little fiefdom where they get to control and determine what happens. And there are signs that many dangerous personalities are actually entering family law. And just as we have seen with the Trump administration, that was specifically targeting parent-child and adult-child bonds at the U.S.-Mexican border and separating them. Family courts are separating the type, usually mother-child bonds, but also father-child bonds. Whatever is working or is good, whenever there are allegations of abuse, the children are sent to the abusing parent. And the safe and protective parent is kept away from the child, kept on protective orders, can only see the child through supervised visitation, or they often go to jail because of their trying to protect the child.
So I'm guessing that the abuser is wealthy and affords an expensive lawyer or somehow buys off the judge?
Yes.
Am I assuming incorrectly? Because that's what makes sense to me. Why? I mean, otherwise, usually what makes sense is that you have guardian ad litems that interview the kids and both parents and make reasonable assessments so the judge can do what's best for the child and not what's best for a particular parent, unless, as you say, there's authoritarianism and justice is being subverted.
And it is functioning as a mini cult. in the sense that they advance a false narrative that the safe parent is actually, the abusing parent is a good parent. And if the children act up and don't wish to go to that parent, the safe parent is a parental alienator. And
Oh
that is
boy.
actually used to overturn any abuse accusation. And in fact, there are some studies that show that 98% of accusations of abuse are disbelieved in family court, whereas 0.1% are actually false accusations. So imagine that reversal. So just about all accusations are disbelieved and turned around, and because they control whatever happens, they appoint the guardians ad litem, who will confirm and advance the judge's preferred narrative. And even experts there's a cottage industry that has arisen around this, where experts also determine that the safe parent is an alienating parent in order to effectuate what the abuser wishes to do, which is to predatorily alienate the safe parent from the child. So I did not believe that this world existed, and never knew about family courts because I, as a fully trained forensic psychiatrist, would not be qualified in family court. Most of them don't even have doctorates. And
The experts don't have doctorates?
and if they do, they're usually psychologists, and the amount that they charge for their predetermined evaluations is astronomical. They charge 10 to 20 times. I've even seen 100 times my regular fees. And so this is the secret world.
This is expert witnesses for money and has nothing to do with actually caring about the children and doing what's best for the children. But I know Bill Bernay and I know other psychiatrists who've worked in the parental alienation world. There are psychologically valid instruments for evaluating who's the alienated parent or not. So there's science here that can be used, but you're saying that the corruption is so widespread that it can't get in there because of this cottage industry. What do we do to fix it other than try to shine a light on it? Maybe someone listening to this in the media would like to try to do an investigative report or a documentary on this or something.
Yes, and I wish to call attention to this issue because while I was speaking up about Trump, many members of the public kept contacting me, asking me, please look into family courts, please pay attention to this issue. And I was never interested in family court because I assumed that these are family conflicts that the courts are resolving, and I deal with mass murderers or serial rapists, and the most dangerous individuals society produces. But I did not know that courts themselves are essentially corrupt to the point of, well, I say that many people who are in this area have tried to educate the judges to reform the courts. And I say against $50 billion per year industry, there would be very little we could do by educating. And the only reason I became aware of this was when my sister was undergoing a divorce. I imagined she was just going through an ordinary divorce. But her husband, who was absentee father before the divorce, suddenly paid attention to the children and wanted to have the children. Of course, he was abusive. He actually nearly killed each of his two children on two separate occasions, and injured them almost with every session with them. And so the children didn't wish to go with him, and he was on a restraining order. Eventually, the children wanted to try to burn the house down, not to go to him. And then family court intervened and negated the temporary restraining order, sent the children to him, even as they were having panic attacks. If they locked themselves in their rooms and didn't wish to go, the police escorted them. And so to make a long story short, they were transferred to the sole custody of the father. And my sister has not seen her kids for 2 years. I thought
Oh my
this
God.
was, and they were only 7 and 9 at the time.
Oh,
So
that's child abuse.
imagine the developmental trauma and the lifelong psychological problems they will have, psychological, medical problems, a couple decades of loss of life expectancy that comes with this kind
Right.
of trauma. And yet family courts are doing this routinely. I found out that my sister's case is by far not the worst case, that this is actually happening almost like a formula.
Yeah.
Since then, I've picked up about a dozen family court cases, and they are all each worse, one worse than the other. It's so widespread, and so many deaths are happening at a scale that we would, similarly to the Nazi Holocaust, much was happening without the awareness of the public. And if this...
Oh, the children were taken to Nazi camps,
Yes,
and then the
exactly.
kids were programmed against their parents if they
Exactly, and
weren't
that's
good
what's
Nazi
happening.
supporters.
That's happening in reunification
Horrible.
camps. They are camps that are set up by unlicensed so-called professionals who take children who are resisting their abusive parent. They separate them from the safe and protective parent, imprison them essentially with the abusive parent, and force them into have them undergo starvation, torment them to
It's
the point
amazing.
of
This
thought
is
reform.
America.
Yes.
This is America. And I just want to say, I learned about parental alienation back in the 70s when I got out of the Moonies, because when you're in a mind control cult, if you're married and have kids and one of the parents wants to leave, the parents are made to program the kids to think that the leaving parent is evil.
That's right.
And does everything possible to have custody to keep control over this. So this is happening around the globe, but it was about 20 years ago I started learning about non-religious cults, just the narcissistic parent
That's right.
doing this, brainwashing the children. So I've had a number of interviews on my website about parental alienation, but this family court piece is new information
And they
for me.
they abuse the phrase parental alienation in order to engage in predatory alienation. In other words, they apply the phrase parental alienation where it doesn't apply, and basically to label anybody as an alienator so as to send the children where they wish to. And when they send the children to the wrong parent, of course, all these experts get involved, and a whole lot of people make a lot of money. And I spoke with William Bernay as well. My suggestion to him was that he use psychological violence, not just parental alienation, because it's too mild a phrase for what actually happens. And it's usually the otherwise abusing parent who is also doing the parental alienation, not the safe protective parent with no history who raised the children themselves and did so successfully.
And we come full circle to the cult of Trump, because that's the psychological warfare technique, to project onto the other that which you are doing, deflect attention, take the words and twist them for their purposes, for propaganda purposes.
Yes.
So it's really a form, another location or application of psychological warfare aimed at creating chaos and breaking up families and causing trauma. Because this whole thing is unbelievably traumatizing, not just for the parent that's being alienated, but the brothers, the sisters, the grandparents, and everyone else.
Oh, and the children who are abruptly extracted from their loving parent, other primary supports, their nurturing home environment, and sent to their abuser of all things. It's the worst kind of child abuse you can imagine, and the worst trauma, because to experience the abuse while you're separated from your primary supports, of course, is the worst
Right.
conditions, worst kind of conditions.
Exactly. I interviewed Dana Laquadera, who was alienated from her mother at age 4 by the father. And she and her sister waited till they're in their early 20s to track down the mother to hear the other side.
Yes.
But they weren't just alienated from her, it was all of the mother's side of the family who they loved and wanted to have contact with. But the father, who then remarried, and the stepmother enforced that they have to call her mother. It was just, and so anyway, she wrote a memoir about it as an alienated child, and just how horrible it was.
Yes,
and how wrong it was.
I'm actually writing a book on this issue. It's called The Dangerous Case of Family Courts, and for it, I'm interviewing children of the family court system, child victims,
Great.
Parent victims.
Great. Do you have a publisher?
Not yet.
Or you just not yet? Well, I want to help, and please speak at the forensic think tank that you've done numerous talks for, that I'm involved with at Harvard Medical School, because I think we need to alert more experts, more medical experts on this. So coming back full circle, mental health professionals have a duty to warn, and it's about caring about the public, putting their needs at a very high level, and realizing that the powers that be should be doing far more to utilize mental health experts who are bipartisan, so there can't be any, notion that there's an agenda there, but really based on science and evidence, to teach the public what's healthy and what's not healthy. Who are the predators that you should be careful not to go out on blind dates with on Tinder or whatever? Please, this is out there. And to never keep secrets. If somebody says, don't tell your parents or don't tell your family about us, they wouldn't understand. Go and tell them immediately. It means that they're trying to do information control, right? And mind control.
And this is
on you.
Expertise belongs to the public. Our societal role is to share the best available knowledge in our fields with the public.
Right.
And a democracy means that the public has access to this knowledge to be able to make informed decisions, whether it's professionals, intellectuals, or journalists who provide knowledge and information and facts.
Right.
This is critical for a democracy to be able to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're wrapping up, tell us about the World Mental Health Coalition, what your hope is for that. We can mention that you believe freedom of mind is an important human right for all, and how people can contact you and get involved and support your good work through the coalition if they're mental health professionals, or sign up for your Substack because you're writing about what's going on from your point of view. So as we wrap up, tell us a little bit more about your work.
Yes, absolutely. The World Mental Health Coalition, which formed in late 2017 and consists of, at one point, we were several thousand mental health professionals concerned about societal mental health. And as you know, your freedom of mind also inspired us to put out a declaration of the freedom of mind, which people can simply Google and look up. But all the links to my newsletter as well as to the World Mental Health Coalition are on my website, bandylee.com. That's BANDYLEE.com. And
Great.
and also you can follow me on Twitter, Bandy X Lee 1, where I give
Yeah, go to
periodic.
your website and you have the links there, and we're going to write a blog and we'll embed the video for those who are listening if you want to see Bandy as she's describing these important topics. And I'll just hold up a book that people should still read if they want to understand what the hell's going on right now with so many millions of Americans and the GOP, and realize there is a path out of this, but we need to use our smarts and our expertise and work together for the common good. We have to.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for
Yeah.
bringing attention to this issue, Dr. Hassan.
Yeah, and thank you for your good work, and thank you for your support in the Cult of Trump book as well. So, Mutual Admiration Society. So I hope to wish you good luck, and I definitely want to help if I can with the family court cult. It sounds like
Yes.
authoritarian cult system. It's about power, money, and maybe sex, but it's always, but for sure, power
yes.
and money.
Sexual abuse is very big in the family courts, unfortunately.
Yeah. So stay in touch, and thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Steve Hassan here. You know, it's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the Super Thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.